Grace is the door, but faith is the journey. In the beginning, it was grace that called your name when you didn't even know there was a voice speaking. You were lost, wandering through the shadows, walking in circles without direction. It wasn't your strength that saved you, nor your righteousness that drew him to you. It was grace, divine, unearned, undeserved, like the first light that breaks into the dark. It was grace that came to you when you were still bound, still stained, still covered in the dust of Egypt. It reached you not because of who you were, but because of who he is. Grace made the impossible possible. Grace split the sea. Grace opened the door. But the door is not the destination. A doorway is meant to be walked through. A threshold is meant to be crossed. Grace opens the way, but it does not walk the path for you. The sea may have parted, but the journey still lay ahead. The promised land was not behind the Red Sea. It was far beyond it. And to reach it, something else was needed. Faith. Faith is not the same as grace. Grace is given freely, but faith must be chosen. Grace is poured out, but faith must rise up. Imagine the moment Israel stood on the other side of the sea. The water had closed over Pharaoh's army. The chains were broken. The past was gone. But what now? The wilderness stretched out before them, vast and unknown. They had escaped, but they had not arrived. The temptation would be to stop there, to build their camp on the edge of the miracle and never go further, to live in the memory of deliverance, but not press on into the fulfillment of the promise. That is where many still dwell, at the edge of grace, singing songs about what God did, but never walking forward in faith into what he still desires to do. Grace will bring you out, but it will not take you in. Grace opens the way, but faith must walk the walk. Faith is the daily choosing to move forward when you cannot see what lies ahead. It is the step in the wilderness when the map is missing and the signs are gone. Faith says, I don't have to understand to obey. I don't have to see the finish to take the next step. Without faith, you stop moving. Without faith, you circle the mountain year after year, never crossing into the promise. The children of Israel saw miracles. They saw water from a rock, manna from heaven, a cloud by day and fire by night. And yet, when the time came to enter the land, they drew back. Not because of a lack of grace. Grace had already brought them that far, but because of a lack of faith. They feared the giants more than they trusted the promise. They saw the walls and forgot the one who brought down the sea. They remembered the strength of the enemy and forgot the strength of their God, so they did not enter in. That entire generation died in the wilderness, not because God's grace had run out, but because their faith never rose up. That is the tragedy of stopping at the door. The journey is not complete at the moment of salvation. Grace saves the soul, but faith walks the life. Faith walks through the deserts, over the hills, past the strongholds. It keeps going when comfort calls out, when doubt whispers, when fear screams. It is not passive. It is active. Faith takes the hand of grace and says, let's go where it doesn't just thank God for yesterday's deliverance, it trusts him for tomorrow's battle. Grace says, you are forgiven. Faith says, because I am forgiven, I will follow. Grace opens heaven's gate. Faith walks the narrow road. The enemy will try to deceive you into thinking that grace is enough to settle, enough to rest forever at the edge. But grace never calls you to settle. Grace awakens you to rise. Faith answers that call. Faith is what causes Abraham to leave the land of his fathers. Faith is what drives Moses back into Egypt to face the oppressor. Faith is what makes Peter step out of the boat, what leads Paul through prison and persecution. They all knew grace, but they also knew this. Grace was the door, but faith was the journey. Grace rescues, but faith presses on. Grace comes in the moment of desperation, in the hour when all seems lost, when your strength is gone and your hope has run dry. It finds you in the lion's den, in the fiery furnace, in the depths of the sea. Grace is the hand that lifts you out when the waters threaten to consume you. It is the voice that says, peace, be still, when the storm howls around you. Grace is the miracle, the intervention, the divine rescue that comes not because you earned it, but because he is good. It is the gift that pulls you from the pit. It is the covering that protects you from the destroyer. But once you have been rescued, once you have tasted the goodness of his grace, there comes a choice, not to remain, but to continue. And that is where faith must rise. Faith is not for the moment of rescue. It is for the walk after. It is for the valley that lies beyond the mountaintop experience. Grace may part the Red Sea, but faith must lead you through the wilderness. Grace may shut the mouths of lions, but faith must go down into the den. Grace may shield you from the flames, but faith must walk into the fire. It was not grace alone that made Daniel kneel and pray, knowing full well it would lead to the lions. It was faith, it was not grace, that made the three Hebrews stand when the music played and the statue loomed. It was faith Grace was the result, but faith was the cause. Faith moves before the miracle. Faith obeys before the outcome. Faith chooses God even when deliverance is not guaranteed. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood before the king and declared, "Our God is able to deliver us, and he will. But even if he does not, we will not bow." That is faith, not in outcome, but in the character of God. Faith that presses on when the rescue hasn't come yet. Faith that says, "I know the fire is hot, but I know who walks with me." Grace may have built the altar, but faith lays the sacrifice upon it. Grace saved Noah, but faith made him build the ark long before the rain fell. Grace may have appeared in the calling, but faith is what moved Abraham to leave his land, his family, his comfort, to journey toward a promise he could not see. The problem is not that we do not believe in grace. Many have seen it. Many have tasted the rescue. But too many stop there. Too many build tabernacles around a single moment of deliverance and never move beyond it. They remember the miracle, but they do not press forward in obedience. They thank God for what he did, but do not trust him for what he wants to do next. Grace is the rescue from bondage, but faith is the journey into obedience. Faith is what turns the rescued into the refined. It is what transforms the freed into the faithful. In the wilderness, the people of Israel saw miracle after miracle. They saw manna fall from heaven, water flow from rocks, armies defeated without a sword raised. But when it came time to enter the land, to step into the fullness of the promise, they turned back. Not because God's grace was absent, it was there, the same as before, but because their faith failed. They saw the giants and forgot the God who crushed Pharaoh. They saw the walls of Jericho and forgot the sea that had parted before them. Grace had brought them out, but only faith could have taken them in. And because they lacked it, they wandered, delivered but delayed, saved but stuck, rescued but never pressed on. Faith does not deny the difficulty. It sees the fire, the lions, the giants, and still obeys. Faith says, "I was rescued to run, not to rest." It presses forward even when the road grows narrow, even when the sky grows dark. Faith walks in the silence when the heavens seem still. It clings to the promise when the fulfillment is far off. Grace may open the gate, but faith runs the race. Grace sustains you in the storm, but faith rows the boat. Faith says, "Because he brought me out, I will go where he sends." It doesn't live in yesterday's miracle. It moves into tomorrow's mission. It keeps going when others stop. It keeps trusting when others fall away. It keeps building, believing, pressing on, because it knows the one who rescued is the same one who will carry through. Grace brought you out, but faith leads you in. Grace is the hand of God that reaches into your captivity and pulls you from the chains of bondage. It is the moment when the yoke is shattered, when the cries in the night are answered, when the blood of the Lamb is placed over the door and the angel of death passes by. It is the night when the oppressor is silenced and the door to freedom is opened wide. It is not earned, not deserved, not purchased with gold or silver, but given freely by the mercy of the Most High. Grace does not wait for perfection. It meets you in your brokenness. It did not wait for Israel to be worthy. It came to them in Egypt, in their affliction, in their groaning. Grace heard their cry and responded. But once grace brings you out, the journey is not over. It has only just begun. Grace brings you out, but it does not bring you in. It delivers you from Pharaoh, but it does not conquer the giants in the land. It splits the sea, but it does not cause the walls of Jericho to fall. That is where faith comes in. Faith is the response to grace. It is what must rise when the memory of Egypt fades and the horizon of promise begins to appear. It is the fire that burns when the cloud moves forward. It is what causes your feet to move toward a land you've never seen, to fight battles you cannot win in your own strength, to stand on promises that have not yet manifested. When Israel crossed the Red Sea, they rejoiced. They sang songs of deliverance. They praised the God who shattered the chariots and drowned the horsemen. But as they journeyed through the wilderness, the rejoicing faded. The miracles continued, but the faith did not. They had seen the power of God, but they had not yet learned to trust his heart. When the spies returned with news of the promised land, only 2 believed. The others saw the fruit, but focused on the giants. They tasted the sweetness, but feared the strength of the enemy. They forgot who had brought them out, and so they failed to go in. They had grace. They had the evidence of divine intervention. They had seen the plagues, eaten the manna, followed the cloud, drank from the rock. But when the moment of entry came, they drew back. Not because God was not faithful, but because their faith failed. They had been delivered, but they had not been transformed. And so they wandered. For 40 years, they walked in circles, living under grace, but never entering the fullness of the promise. The land was still there. The covenant was still intact. But without faith, they could not take hold of it. There are many who have come out of Egypt, many who have been saved, rescued, redeemed. They have left behind the old life, the old chains, the old wounds, but they have not gone in. They have not stepped into the destiny prepared for them. They stand on the edge of the promise, living in the shadow of grace, but never pressing into the calling. They speak of what God has done, but not of what he desires to do. They remember the miracles, but not the mission. They sing of the Red Sea, but do not march around Jericho. Grace is a gift, but faith is a response. Grace flows from the throne of heaven, initiated not by the worthiness of man, but by the love of God. It is the undeserved favor that reaches into the lives of the broken, the fallen, the guilty, and says, live. It is the voice that called to Lazarus in the tomb before he could even stir. It is the mercy that covered Adam and Eve with garments after they had fallen. It is the compassion that touched the leper before the cleansing ever came. Grace is always first. It is always the initiator. It is the wind that blows before the sail is ever raised. It is the invitation given to those who would never dare to ask. But the gift of grace does not demand. It offers. It does not coerce. It invites. And in the face of such a gift, faith must rise as the answer. Faith does not create the gift, it receives it. It does not earn the blessing, it responds to it. Grace says, I have made the way, and faith says, I will walk in it. Grace pours out forgiveness, and faith reaches out to take hold. Grace lays the foundation, and faith builds upon it. Where grace is the voice calling out, faith is the echo that answers back. Faith is not passive. It does not sit idle, waiting for something more. It is not mere mental agreement. It is movement. It is obedience. It is surrender. The woman with the issue of blood did not wait for Jesus to find her. Grace had already come near in the form of the Messiah walking the streets. But it was faith that pushed her through the crowd. It was faith that reached out to touch the hem of his garment. Grace was flowing, but faith took hold. Grace provided the healing, but faith activated it. In the wilderness, grace provided manna, water, protection. Yet, when the promise was before them, it was not grace they lacked, it was faith. The provision had been constant, the miracles had been visible, but the land was not entered by those who simply received, it was entered by those who believed. Faith must be present not just to receive the blessing, but to walk in the fullness of the calling. The spies who feared the giants did not lack grace. They had been recipients of it every day, but they lacked the faith to respond rightly to what grace had prepared. It is easy to rejoice in grace when it comes, to celebrate the deliverance, the rescue, the blessing. But grace does not stop at the rescue. It prepares the way forward, and that way can only be walked by faith. Faith that trusts when the road is rough. Faith that believes when the outcome is uncertain. Faith that obeys when the command is hard. Grace will speak to you in the quiet, but faith must answer in the storm. Grace will bring the promise near, but faith will walk around the Jericho walls. Grace is the gift, but faith is the key that unlocks the door to the next. The paralyzed man could not walk, yet grace brought Jesus to his town. But it was the faith of his friends that tore open the roof. It was faith that refused to wait, refused to be denied, refused to leave him in his condition. The gift was already present in Christ. The power was there. But faith moved to access what grace had made available. It is the same for all who seek more than just survival. For those who desire to walk in purpose, in calling, in destiny, grace has already spoken. It has already declared, already given, already opened the way. The question is no longer whether grace will come. It has come. The question is whether faith will rise to answer, whether it will obey when it does not understand, whether it will follow when the path is unclear, whether it will believe when the promise looks impossible. Faith does not add to grace, it does not complete it, but it does respond. And in that response, the gift becomes power, and the promise becomes reality. Grace is the beginning, but faith is what keeps you. Grace is the moment when light breaks into the darkness, when the hand of God reaches into your prison and unlocks the chains that held you bound. It is the sudden turning, the divine interruption, the holy intervention that snatches you from death and places your feet on the road of life. But what happens after the miracle? What happens after the chains fall, after the prison doors open, after you step out of Egypt? Grace may have set you free, but it is faith that will keep you free. It is faith that will hold you steady when the winds rise and the storms roar. It is faith that will anchor you when the feelings fade and the road grows long. Faith is what holds you when nothing makes sense, when the blessing doesn't look like you thought it would, when the dream is delayed, when the prayers seem to go unanswered. Faith is not loud. Sometimes it's just a whisper in the night that says, keep going. Faith clings to the unseen. It rests not in circumstances, but in the character of God. It trusts his heart even when it can't trace his hand. Faith walks on water even while the storm rages. It follows the voice of the shepherd even when the path goes through the valley of the shadow. The early church was birthed in grace. The Spirit fell like fire. The sound of wind filled the room and thousands came to salvation. But after the fire came the test. Persecution rose. Scattering began. Imprisonments, beatings, threats. Yet they did not turn back. They continued in faith, not because it was easy, not because the miracles were constant, but because they knew the one who called them was faithful. They held fast to the promise, to the word, to the mission. Grace had started the fire, but faith kept it burning. Paul, beaten and shipwrecked, pressed on, not because of strength in himself, but because he had learned to live by faith. He declared that he had been saved by grace, yes, but he also said he ran the race with endurance. He fought the good fight. He kept the faith. He understood that faith was not just for the beginning, it was for the middle, for the storms, for the prison cells, for the lonely roads, for the unanswered questions. Faith sustains, faith preserves, faith carries what grace begins. Jesus said to those who believed in him, "If you continue in my word, then you are truly my disciples. Not if you begin, but if you continue." Grace opens the book, but faith turns the pages. Grace writes the first word, but faith follows the story to the end. There will be moments when you wonder if you're still on the right path, when the voices around you tell you to quit, when the old chains call to you again. But faith keeps you walking. It reminds you of the God who brought you this far. It stirs the remembrance of past victories. It sings songs of deliverance in the night seasons. Faith is not always about moving mountains. It's often about staying the course, standing firm, holding on. In a world of shifting shadows, faith holds to the unchanging word. In the face of trial, it looks beyond the fire to the one who walks in it. In seasons of lack, it remembers the one who multiplied the loaves. Grace saves you in a moment, but faith will keep you in every moment that follows. Grace is what called you, but faith is what qualifies you. Grace found you when you had no name, no strength, no standing. It called you out from the shadows, spoke your name in the silence, laid its hand on your shoulder while you were still covered in the dust of your failure. It did not ask for credentials, did not wait for your resume of righteousness, did not require that you be cleaned up before it came knocking. Grace came when you were disqualified. It entered your life when every voice, including your own, declared that you were not enough, not ready, not worthy. Grace ignored the accusations, dismissed the charges, and clothed you in garments you could never afford. But grace does not stop at calling. It awakens purpose. It places something holy inside of you, a seed, a fire, a vision, a burden. It says come, but it also says go. It says you are forgiven, and then it says now follow me. And to do that, to rise from where grace found you and walk into what grace has called you to, you will need faith, because what grace awakens, faith must walk out. What grace declares, faith must demonstrate. You may be chosen by grace, but you are proven by faith. You are made righteous by grace, but you are made ready by faith. When David was called, he was still in the fields. The prophet anointed him by grace. He had done nothing to earn the oil, but it was faith that led him into the valley to face the giant. It was faith that refused Saul's armor, that chose a sling and 5 stones. Grace chose him while he was overlooked, but faith rose when the armies trembled. Grace made him king, but faith